Alright, welcome back to the channel. Warhammer Man back in the studio, and today we're going to be demonstrating how to make some custom ruined temple style bases. If you're new to the channel, make sure you like and subscribe for Warhammer 40,000, Age of Sigmar, Necromunda, Warcry, and of course, Kill Team content. Today, and most days, we'll be doing everything from reaction reviews to Warhammer and other related products, as well as tutorials, how to build, how to convert, paint, and everything in between, as well as showing off completed commissions as they leave the studio. So today we're going to demonstrate how we turn this piece of Games Workshop terrain into a whole army worth of bases. So this is our ruined kind of like temple deal from an Age of Sigmar set. It's basically just a piece of terrain. On the bottom it's got like some support pieces for strength, but it is basically just a sort of like temple, three-dimensional little ordeal. But what we do is go ahead and chop it up into a ton of pieces and turn it into bases, because it makes for a super cool style base that I use on a lot of my commissions. It is extremely popular and looks really cool. Every single one looks different and is handmade, and you can make a whole army's worth for a fraction of the price if you were going to buy aftermarket bases, and they look exponentially better than if you're just going to use like some rocks and sand, in my opinion. So the first step is, and the main tool that we need is, obviously we need one of these. We also need a hole saw. So if you're not familiar with a hole saw, this is a hole saw. It is basically just a drill bit in the middle and then a circular kind of saw blade that goes around it. You put it onto your drill, you stick it somewhere, and then it drills out a hole. This one is 1 3/4. The goal for this is to drill out 40mm base ones. So when we make these ones, they fit perfectly on top of the 40mm base, which is the correct size for like adeptus custodes. Or I will take the circle pieces that I cut out of this and the scraps that are left over, and then I'll cut them up into 3 smaller pieces, and I'll use those to make either a 32mm base with like sand and like blank spots on the base, or I'll use it for even smaller bases like 25 or 28mm. But I do like the way that these look right on top of the 40mm. You basically just have to fill in the hole in the middle after you drill it out, and then you're good to go. So, and I always like to add in a little bit of extra sand, some skulls, all that good stuff. And we also will be doing some jet bike bases, as well as some grav tank, and also some forge world dreadnought bases as well. And this is the completion of a very large commission, so we'll be able to show you off exactly how we make the bases themselves, and then you'll be able to see very shortly afterwards what they look like completed and painted and everything. So you'll get the full effect with these in a reasonable amount of time. So the first step is we need to take this, and we basically just want to go around this entire thing and drill out a bunch of circles. And then we're going to use those circles obviously as the bases. Now what I like to do is I like to keep this center portion intact. So when I drill this out, I will drill a bunch of the holes around this and then leave the centerpiece as a whole. And then same with like the steps. Obviously you can't really have guys standing on the steps in the same way, so the main area we're focusing on is just this top portion of it. So you can do it however you want. You could start just doing one here and then just kind of working your way around until the middle piece is done. You can start in the corners and work your way around. There's a million different ways you can do it. It is really up to you how you want to do it, or if you want to do it, but I will show you exactly how I do it. The best way to do it is essentially just take your piece right here, and you can go ahead and put this on a drill and do it the traditional way, but I like to do it this way as well. So we'll go ahead and just do it the easy way. Well, it doesn't work every time. Sometimes it takes a couple tries before it works. Okay, this is embarrassing. Of course, it's when everybody's watching. Okay, so yeah, that is basically it. So now we have all of our various pieces. I just got to kind of clean up the mess, but that's a lot easier than going through and drilling it all out. So once we kind of gather everything up, this one is a little different of a situation because I'm actually doing something unique with this one that I don't always do with these. But I'm making actually like a display style base as well as all of our regular bases. So when it's all said and done, we're going to end up with essentially like a few different style pieces. So this time I'm doing something a little bit different. I'm actually doing a series of regular bases and then also a display base for like the main character. So essentially, instead of just drilling out a couple extra corner pieces and just kind of discarding like the stairs and everything, I leave the corner pieces and then just cut them off even. So what I'm going to end up doing is I'm going to end up combining these 4 pieces back into a smaller little pyramid. And then once I have them glued and I fill in all the seams and make it look pretty and everything, I'm actually going to drill out one more base out of the center of it. And then I will put a platform on the bottom, a magnet inside of it, and then the lead character of this army, in this case, it'll be Trajan Valoris of the Adeptus Custodes. He will have a display base so that he stands out amongst the army. And then we're going to have like essentially some larger bases like this for the dreadnoughts. This one will go on a Telemann dreadnought, kind of clean it up a little bit, and that will be his base. And then we'll do some various stuff with our other bits and pieces that are left over for like our grav tanks, or we can use these for different conversions or something like that. So, but these are essentially what we're after. A bunch of these bad boys. So these are that 1 3/4 inches, which is basically the same size as a 40mm base. In this case, we ended up with 5, 10, 14 of those. One large one, and then these 4 pieces here. Alternatively, if we just kept this one as large or we didn't do this one at all, we'd end up with somewhere closer to like an extra 4 from this, so maybe 18, so about like 25 or so. And then again, if we were going to turn these into like our typical 32mm or 25mm bases, each one of these would basically get cut into a third, and then we would have ruined pieces to put on each base. So we really end up with like, instead of like 25 to 30 bases, we end up with like 75 to like 90 bases. And then typically we end up with these left over regardless. But because we're doing some of the Adeptus Custodes grav tanks as well, we're going to end up using some of these bits on that. To kind of like have some ruined kind of temple stairs and stuff, as where when we're doing our regular guys, we want more of a flat surface to mount them to. We don't want a bunch of jagged angles, and we want to make sure we can get like good contact so we don't break off the bases later. And then these are just random little bits that we can use on some of the larger bases for the dreadnoughts and the tanks to kind of fill in some gaps, and we'll bust these up, cut them up into like ruins. But most importantly, after I go ahead and do that, I go and cut off those little support pieces on the bottom. I just use metal clippers, cut all those off, and then you'll notice that they're still kind of rough and they're not going to attach to like the actual top of the base that well. So I will take sandpaper and I will just sand down the bottom of these so they're almost flat. Now, because a lot of these have like a line that goes through them, if we sand in too deep, these pieces will just come apart because that's the only thing holding it together. So you kind of have to go like a little slow at first and figure out exactly how far you want to go, or you can go, so that you don't just ruin all these nice little bases. But the goal now is to essentially just take each one of these, kind of clean up the edges with a razor blade, scrape off some of the excess stuff, make them a little more like round and not have like the little jagged random pieces and stuff on there. But that's it. Clean them up and then mount them to the actual base themselves. And you'll see we get quite a bit of like diversity between them. So we end up with ones that have like the little skulls and the writing on them, you know, lots and lots of that style. We will end up with ones that have just more of the regular kind of stuff going on with the skulls like downset in there. We'll end up with some pieces with little bits missing where the drilling overlaps. But essentially we just end up with a bunch of nice looking bases that have great texture. And then by the time we're done adding in some sand, some rocks, some skulls, and then we throw a sweet paint job on them as well, kind of clean them up, these things look awesome. And you will see that because we will just go through the steps here shortly. So the next step is essentially to just kind of clean up everything that we have here, and then we can kind of move on from there. So all right, so basically just went ahead and took a bunch of the pieces that we drilled out, a bunch of the pieces left over, and some other bits, and just kind of attached them to the bases. So just going down essentially what I explained before, left some of the pieces large for the jet bikes. Most of the pieces are the full circles that we drilled out, and then there's a couple various size ones for the grav tanks, for the dreadnoughts as well. And then of course we worked a little bit on the display base for Trajan Valoris. And then there's a couple smaller ones too for a separate commission, and then also for Aliyah to go along with this. So we can take a closer look and just kind of see where we're at. So this one will be for the Telemann dreadnought. Essentially just left that circle part intact so it has a cool look to it, and then just kind of carved it up so it looks natural, trimmed up some of the little bits and everything, and then I'm going to add a little bit of the cork and some sand around the edges. And now next, this will be for one of the smaller Forge World dreadnoughts. So I just went ahead and glued a large piece onto here. how I wanted it, little bits sticking over, but I'm going to go ahead and trim these up. So I'm not going to go through and show you exactly how I do all of these, but I will just kind of do a quick little demonstration. And you could just as easily trim these ahead of time and then just kind of attach them to the bases, or just do like this, but I basically just kind of cut around the edge. And then I'm going to snap these pieces off, and I'll be using those to essentially just fill out the rest of the base. So now we basically have everything the right size for the base. We just need to go ahead and add on some little bits and kind of fill it out. But we have a nice platform area for our dreadnought to stand. And we'll just do the same thing for this one as well. You'll see I kind of attach the rounded edge around here so that it looks regular. This was essentially a piece that I started to drill out, and then I just kind of snapped off. So we'll just roll with what we have here. There we go. That's pretty much what we're looking for. And we'll just do the same thing for some of these smaller ones as well. And you can leave some of the bits kind of sticking over the edge. I try not to have it like too intense. So I really don't want to interfere with like the play ability. I also try to try not to make them like ridiculously tall either, so that they would be like have an advantage or disadvantage for gameplay. But the goal is whatever model you're going to put on here, you just want to make sure that you have like the right amount of distance for their feet. So if they're like running on 1 foot, just a nice flat area in the middle is good. If they have their legs like spread out, like some of these will go on Sisters of Battle with heavy weapons. So we need basically a nice flat area from side to side. And we're not going to get particularly fancy with these. Some of them are going to be super basic. Other ones will have a little bit more of like the design to them. But essentially that is our goal. I want to take away little bits that look unnatural. So if we have like kind of too many rounded edges, I kind of like square those off a little bit. Doesn't have to be like some super detailed, amazing process, especially when we're doing this many of them. We just want to do it nice and quick, get them to where they need to be, and then we can move on to our next step. And then this will be for the jet bikes. So there's two ways you can do this. You can either leave the central portion in the middle and then just kind of add rubble on the sides, or you can just kind of do your thing. Regardless though, once I am done actually texturing the base, what I do is I flip it over and I'll put a pilot hole in the bottom, and then I go ahead and drill the pilot hole all the way through, and then I will drill out the correct size for the base to slide in, and then I will drill a hole about this big that just goes through the texture I added on top, so that the flying stand can slide right down in there, push fit, and it is good to go. And then I'll add the magnets and do all that good stuff. But we can demonstrate that a little later on as well. But it is very effective, very efficient, and works great. There we go. Nothing too fancy. That's all we're looking for. There we are. And the key here is for them all to look different. We want to have them look like they come from the same army or the same like kind of terrain or battlefield, kill zone, whatever. But we don't want them all to look exactly the same, obviously. And this was one of the ones where I had drilled out right next to it. So I just want to take away like the kind of circular shape because they tend to not look as natural. Now there are some circles built into this actual terrain, so it's okay and you can definitely get by with it. But in general, there's not going to be like rounded areas in natural occurring objects or terrain bits. So you do want to kind of take that away. Otherwise it kind of catches your eye and looks sort of like it doesn't belong, or you can tell that it was used like a hole saw to build it. And here's the last one for the bikes. And now here again, we have obviously the round shape of the hold saw. Now we can cover that up with some rubble and kind of take away the roundness of it by just kind of piling some other stuff on it so it doesn't catch your eye as easily. Or we can do just like I was saying, kind of dig around a little bit and texture it up a little bit more so it looks kind of natural. And we're just going to keep doing that and take care of all these. But in the meantime, we'll go ahead and take a look at these. These ones are made for the grav tank. Now what I do is I put the little bit that the flight stand goes on in the middle there, make sure that it's sitting how I like. I trace around the bits that I have to make sure I don't put like rubble in front of, because it will interfere with how the tank sits on here. And then once I have traced the little bits of the front of the tank go right here, I go ahead and just kind of add in some bits accordingly. And then I will take some glue and just add little bits of the cork rubble also. And then once I get it to a stage where I like it and overall nice saturation, I will go through and we'll do some sand on here next. And then add in some little bits of skulls and it'll be good to go. But obviously the most important thing here is to just make sure that we don't interfere with how the model actually sits on the base. But with the magnet and the flight stand and everything, we'll eventually attach the clear flight stand right here. And then the magnet will be in the bottom of the tank and the top of the flight stand. So when we pick up the tank to move it around, the flight stand, like this whole base, will come with it. But then when we want to store or transport it, we can easily separate the two. And then here we have our display base for Trajan Valorous as well. So obviously he is the master of the custodes. So we want to make sure that he stands out when he's sitting there with his army. He doesn't just blend in. And because there's giant like Telemon dreadnoughts and whatnot and big old grav tanks, he just looks like a regular bro. And the tiny little bit of base that comes with him just doesn't do him justice. So we create this pedestal basically for him so that he can command from high. So this is the 4 pieces of our terrain. Essentially what I did was I just went ahead and sanded them down flat, and then I attached the 4 of them together, test fit it a couple times, make sure it's right, kind of take down the pieces where you need to. And then once we get it how we want it, just going to kind of clean up the edges a little bit, and I will go ahead and just attach some little pieces of plastic card to the bottom right here. And then when I go ahead and fill in those gaps, I can just put a little glue down in the hole and then just fill it in with a little bit of green stuff. And it doesn't need to be perfect. After we fill it in, just kind of squish some in there with the razor blade. I'll just kind of like use a tool or my finger and just kind of rub over top of it, take away some of the excess. And then of course, obviously we're going to texture this up with a couple of skulls and some sand and everything as well. And that will take away like the overall look of the joints. So here we obviously have a bunch of like stones or bricks together. So we'll be able to easily blend that in and make it so it doesn't catch your eye as 4 pieces. But we can see it's already kind of starting to work. So, and then for the actual base itself in the middle, it is magnetized. So essentially what I do is when we flip it over here, we'll see that there are some textured pieces on the bottom. I just cut out a nice piece of plastic card and glue that on there. And then I trace around the base and essentially just take a circle bit and stick that down in there just to get the height right between where it normally would set on its own and to make this essentially flush up at the top. The hole that we have drilled here, where it was 4 separate bases, now it is attached as one, and I drop a magnet right down in that hole, and then I will line this up exactly where I want it, put a little dab of glue on the middle and the back, and then I'll drop the magnet onto the back and let it glue in place. So now this base is magnetized to the stand, but can easily be removed by just grabbing onto Trajan, or in this case, just using another magnetic thing to take it out of there. It's a little bit difficult to kind of like grab it out of there with your fingers, but obviously can be done. But once Trajan is attached to this, it'll be fine. So we'll go ahead and just essentially texture around this, paint it up, make it look nice. And then the idea being that when he's sitting on there, he looks like he is part of this terrain feature, but then you can take him off and use him for gameplay. So this is just a little something I came up with, nothing too crazy. The corners for these could be good for like terrain or conversions or something like that. But overall, when you make like hundreds or thousands of these bases as I have, you end up with tons of these corners. So this was just a creative way to essentially make Trajan stand out and, kind of look above sort of from the army. So it looks really cool when it's all said and done, and you guys will get to see that shortly as we progress through this project. But that is essentially our display base for our character model. In this case, Trajan Valoris. So that being said, I'm just going to go ahead and progress through here and just chop off the extra little bits of the random bases that we have. And then we can go ahead and add some of our little bits of cork rocks on as well. And then we'll finish up with some sand. So, and just to kind of show this stuff off here, essentially this is just scrap bits from cork, like train modeling type stuff. What I do is I just take some scissors or clippers like this and I just cut it up into a bunch of random little bits, all different sizes. So it's essentially just rocks. And then I just dump on some super glue, kind of sprinkle it in place. If I'm being like super specific or something, I might cut one exactly how I want it to look or select out one that I want specifically. But overall, the randomness works perfect. And then adding in the sand gives it at least 3 different textures. Whenever I do bases, I like to have a minimum of 3 textures and then typically some skulls or tufts or both as well. That way it looks a little more realistic. So if we have the big ruined temple bits, and then we have some smaller little temple bits added on as well, and then we have the cork, and then we have the sand, and then we add a couple skulls and maybe some tufts as well. That gives us a nice diversity, and it really looks natural and super cool when they're all finished up, which obviously we will see at the end. But this is just a little bit of that cork stuff that I made together, and you go through it pretty quick, but it is essentially like free once you buy the cork roll. I think I got a gigantic roll of cork, and I mean, like gigantic. I want to say it was like a 10-foot roll by like 24 inches. Maybe not 10 feet. Maybe it was 6 feet. I don't know. It's probably more than I will ever use in my life. And I want to say I paid like $30 with shipping for it. So it is enough to make bases completely out of it for probably eternity, or do what I'm doing right here for eternity and then another eternity after that. So, all right. So basically just went through and added in some random little bits. Kind of chopped them up to make them look like they belonged and a little more natural than like the initial cuts, trying to avoid like 90-degree angles or round bits or anything like that. Added in some small little bits of cork as well and just kind of filled out the bases. Next thing to do will be to add some sand and some skulls. And just to kind of show off a couple of different styles, I like to add a little bit of depth. So some pieces that aren't as big or tall, and then also fill in the main holes as well. This is a style I like to do for the jet bikes because the flat surface is not nearly as important as it is with... I like to do this style for the jet bikes with the cool little like stair thing going on, because the flat surface is much less important than it is with the infantry models. But overall, just looking for like that cracked surface. You can see like some of the details down in there, the skulls, the cracks, the little rocks. Nice overall general aesthetic, and definitely making some progress. You can see how much more natural they are looking now. And here we have for the Achilles and Galatas dreadnoughts. I've kind of like added in some bits, kind of made like the little broken ruin bit kind of look like it was broken off there. A little bit of the stones as well, made from cork. And here we have the other one. I just kind of like got rid of the round looking by filling in and kind of overlapping a couple pieces in there. So it looks like it was basically damaged and kind of crumbled under the weight or whatever explosion, etc. And here we have the big jet bike bases. And again, just making sure not to get anything on the little bits over here. But, plenty of our little cork rocks. And then some larger pieces. And then a couple of the very large pieces. And here we have our display base for Trajan. So I use the little rock that comes with this set because it gives him a tiny bit of elevation and makes it so his staff doesn't run into the ground. But you can see there, I just put a couple rocks on the edge. Hid a couple of the more extreme kind of areas where I joined this thing up, and it's already starting to blend in. As we do some sand and add a couple skulls, it should basically appear like it was one piece and not 4 individual pieces that we put together. Then of course for the 40mm bases, some of them required very little of the larger stones and just kind of filled in the middle bit, so when I fill it with sand it won't take as much. And then other ones I added a little bit more, especially to kind of make the bridge the gap between the topper piece that we added on and the actual base itself. And we can see here again, just kind of filling in the gap, adding a little bit of a, bits of the rubble along the edges to kind of fill it out as well. Here's a couple of ones that were made out of the scrap as opposed to like the actual circle cuts. You can see we kind of trimmed it up with the clippers along the way, and again just added in a little bit of rubble. Couple of 20mm bases as well. These are for some cherubs for Sisters of Battle Army. And then finally a couple of the 32mm as well. Just mostly focusing on, a couple different levels, couple different pieces of rubble along the sides, and then obviously just making sure we have a nice flat mounting surface for our models. And now that we've got that all done, we're just going to go through and just kind of add some sand in. Now the main thing I like to do is just make it look natural. So the sand would tend to kind of collect along the edges of this. So I'll just go through with the glue and just kind of add little bits of sand along the edges of the stones, kind of fill in the gap, and then just make sure to overlap some various areas as well. So that is next on the menu, and we're definitely getting close to completed, as all we have left now is the sand and some skulls. All right, so I just went through and sort of filled in some of the gaps with a little bit of sand, and overall everything is looking good. I think we basically just need a couple of skulls to bring out the grimdark of the future, and these bad boys will be good to go. You can see the goal is to obviously fill in a bunch of the cracks and just kind of look for a natural sort of way that the sand or heavier bits would kind of fill in around like the large pieces. Just going for basically like a realistic look to it. So and I tried to avoid the center part where I know I'm going to be drilling out for the jet bike flight stands. But overall, real happy with how everything looks. Filled in a lot of the gaps and just kind of built up the sand around the edges. Nothing too crazy here, but we can see how essentially these bases have really come along. And it's more just nothing too technical. It's sort of just a combination of a bunch of basic steps. And when it's all said and done, the way we've added in like the broken pieces along with the larger pieces essentially just gives that look of a, what was once a temple sort of ground or something like that, that's been bashed and beaten by the elements and war over centuries of battle. And then for the central pieces where all the holes were drilled out, we can kind of see the difference. These ones were made out of just the scrap bits I have, so they don't have that central piece. And these ones I essentially just filled it up and just kind of rubbed it as flat as possible, so that if I mount a person's foot or something over top that, like a lot of the custodes are standing on one foot like centrally mounted, I want to make sure that I can get a nice contact on the surface. And some of the other ones, just not quite as flat. Not that big of a deal because a lot of them will obviously have their legs spread out from both different sides of the bases. So as long as some of them have a nice flat center, that's all that really matters. And the beauty of making these bases is no matter what you do, no two will be the same. Now we just need to position a couple skulls on here, and then obviously the optional tufts if that's something you wanted to do. And we've basically got our completed ruined temple style bases. And here we have a couple of the smaller ones as well. Again, just looking for the same kind of thing, building up a little rubble and some of the loose sand along the edges. But most importantly, we just have a nice flat surface to mount our models. And because we know these two are going to little cherubs, just had to make sure that we had a nice spot to mount their little filigree that's kind of hanging down, and nice and flat so that they could kind of be hovering over the surface. And then here we have the first of the grav tank bases. It's come together really nicely. We have the real large pieces of rubble, some like medium and small pieces of rubble, of course some cork rocks, and then of course we've filled it all out with the sand. Made sure to leave a opening for the little flying stand to attach to the base, and then of course left the front part so that the front portion of the grav tank where it sits on the base can sit flush and it's not interfering with any rubble or sand or anything. And then here we have our second one. And again, just made sure to leave a little ring around here for where we put the flying stand. And then of course leave plenty of room for where we're going to put the front of the grav tank's legs. And then of course once it's sitting on there, will look like there is a war-torn battlefield underneath, but it will be floating above the ground. So we get that full effect. We get the ability to magnetize the bases to the tanks, but you know, they look like they belong. And then of course, last but not least, we have Trajan's little base set up here. So we have the actual base in the middle there. We can rotate it to have any portion of this be the front, depending on where we put the skulls or how it looks best. We might position that in a certain way. But overall, we have blended our four corners together to form essentially just one large pedestal for his display base. And then added in some of the rocks and just random bits of sand to kind of fill the gaps a little bit and make it look like it was one large piece. And then of course, we have the ability to remove his base from here, position it however we want, play with him in our games, and then when we're ready to store him again, we can just pop it back in the middle. It's magnetized and good to go. So go ahead and brush off the loose sand here after we attach some skulls, and then these will be ready for base and painting. All right, we did it. We got them all finished up. Just added on a couple of skulls, pretty much one or two per base. Just kind of position them in random places, try to orient them kind of towards the front, and then once everything is all painted up and ready to go, we should have like that sort of Terminator, end of days kind of grimdark look. Nothing like a couple extra skulls. And then in a lot of cases, I'll add on some tufts as well. Right, so here we can take a final look at our base. We see we have a bunch of random skulls, different looks in different positions. You can see how everything kind of comes together and gives it a nice overall battlefield look. Filled a lot of the gaps, give it a lot of stability by using the sand essentially as like a mortar to kind of fill it all in and connect it all together. So this is a large base that we will use for the Telemon Dreadnought. And one of my favorites, as this is like the center of our initial piece of terrain and why I like to leave it intact. And next we have the first of our two, the Gladys or Achilles Forge World Dreadnought as well. So this one is a slightly larger base. I believe this is the 50mm, if I'm not mistaken. And once again, we can see how it all came together. Made sure to leave nice big areas for the feet to attach, flat with no sand or anything, so we can get a nice connection. And here's the second of our smaller Forge World Dreadnoughts. Again, I've angled a couple skulls looking in each direction. See a combination of all the different mediums and how nice everything has come together for a unique, coherent look between all the different bases. And then here we have a couple of our jet bike bases as well. You can see a nice blend of the skulls, the different stairs, and all the different medium and everything. And now we just need to drill them out for our flight stands. And so here we can see an example of essentially what I go with for the flight stands. I will drill a small pilot hole through the bottom to start it off with. And then I will use that pilot hole to drill a larger hole in the top. And I will drill it out to the correct size so that the actual flight stand fits down in there, with the little nipple from the flight stand fitting down into the actual base itself. And then the actual clear portion of the stand will fit perfectly into that hole there. So we'll have like a double mating surface, which can be glued, and then the magnets on top so that these bases can be removed from the Custodes jet bikes as well. And here we have a couple more. You can see how they all have essentially like the same kind of style to them, but no two look the same. And then obviously we have like the little skull pieces that were built down in there. We have the little textured skulls and the ancient writing, all kind of little bits of broken concrete or whatever it is. Definitely a nice look overall. And then I've left the central portion of the base where the stands will go clear of debris so that it's easy to drill out, as it is a pain in the butt to drill through super glue and sand, because it's basically like trying to drill into something that is trying to eat away at your drill bit. So and here we have the last two of the jet bike bases. Again, overall nice look, everyone looking unique from the previous. And we can just take a look at some of our regular 40mm bases. Little skull here, little skull there. Some are the onset ones. Some are the just overall like kind of carved into stone ones. And for some of them, I have added the skull right in the middle, kind of covering up the little divot from the drill bit itself. For other ones, I've just used the sand to cover it up and just kind of offset the skulls, making sure to pay attention to where the custodes' feet will go. So for instance, the ones that are not drilled out in the center will be the custodes that are running forward on one foot, and then the other ones will be the ones with the spread out legs. And just showing off a couple more. Again, I try to just kind of think how I'm going to orient the bases so that they would look similar on the models, and then which way the skulls will face. And a couple of our 32mm bases as well. Again, just paying attention to where the legs will go. And here's our 25mm all finished up. I just kind of threw one little skull kind of hanging off the edge there. And this is the first of our grav tank spaces. Couple skulls in the front there, kind of looking forward. And then kind of put one on the back here, just kind of peeking around. These bases look so good when they're painted up. Cannot wait to have these all finished up and ready to go. And then of course we have left nice mating surface for the actual tank itself so that we're not having any issues. But you won't even be able to see that these are clear because that's where the tank's front will rest. And here's the second of our bases. Again, just a couple skulls kind of peeking forward there. Couple kind of peeking to the back. And then a nice rubble ruined base look overall. Left plenty of clear area for the tank to rest and for the flight stand as well. And then of course, last but not least, we have Trajan Valoris's display base, our little mini platform pedestal with the base magnetized on top. And then of course we have his small little rock piece there. Added in a bunch of small rocks to kind of blend this all together. And then of course we put the skulls to add a little something extra. Try to just kind of randomize those along there. But the main goal is to just kind of take away from some of the straight lines and kind of break it up so that your eye isn't drawn to it. So it doesn't look like this was made out of 4 pieces. And then of course, once he is attached, be able to remove that for gameplay. We have our magnet in the bottom there, and then a magnet in the center here as well. And there we have it. So he'll look nice on display when you're not playing with him and you have him in your case or displayed on your desk or dresser or wherever in your shop. And then when you're ready to play, you can pull him off there and put him in the game. So there we have it. That is our ruined temple style bases all finished up. Now we just need to go ahead and paint those. So we'll have a tutorial video on those as well. I encourage you to ask any questions that you have down in the comments, as I am glad to share my knowledge. If you have any questions, I will also list the size of the drill bits and magnets and all that other good stuff down there as well, but should have basically shown a nice step-by-step how to make these for yourself. And again, you can do the 40mm bases, 32mm bases. We have the 50mm large bases, the Telemon base, which I'm not sure what size that one is, and then of course I think they're 160 millimeter oval bases for the tanks, and then of course we have this gigantic homemade pedestal as well. So that is it for this video. We have an army and a half worth of bases. So this is all the ones we need for the Custodes commission I'm finishing up. And then a bunch for a smaller expansion commission for Sisters of Battle as well. And a individual character, all kinds of different stuff in here with the same style, as it is a very popular style. If you have any questions, make sure you leave them down below. This is it for today. There are also some other videos where I demonstrate these. I show off how to do the tufts, how to paint them, and again, I will do a follow-up painting these as well. But that's it for today. Oh, and then of course I will do the unveiling of the completed bases painted with the sweet painted Custodes army on top, and then that commission will be ready to go out of the studio. I am done with all the painting on that, so just need to finish up these bases and then get the models attached to the bases, and this commission will be ready to roll. And I'm not gonna lie, it is beautiful. So you'll have to let me know what you think about that one. Make sure you follow up, and of course, if you don't want to miss it, like and subscribe for everything from how to do conversions like these bases here, magnetize, do lighting. I do all kinds of how to paint tutorials as well. Always disclose the paints, drill bit sizes, all the different tools and techniques, just all about furthering the community. So, and then of course I do everything from Warhammer 40,000, Kill Team, Necromunda, Age of Sigmar, and of course Warcry content as well. We do not only the actual crafting and customizing and painting videos, but obviously daily videos as well for all kinds of reactions, reviews, and unboxing. So if you are into fantasy or 40K gaming content, pretty much anything tabletop gaming related, and even a little D&D here and there, this is the spot for you. So make sure you like and subscribe, share it with your friends. That's it for today, folks. Warhammer Man Studios. I'm Warhammer Man, and I'm out of here.